This is going to be a brief tutorial in using LFOs to control wavetable positions and intensity to create kind of sweeping sounding synths. This is a sound that harks back to the days, at least in my ears, of Megadrive, or as you Americans say, Genesis games. Kind of slightly lo-fi yet pretty heavy sounding noise, in my opinion. This preset comes down to 3 oscillators, which are 2 B pulses at different positions on the wavetable and slightly different intensities, and the third one, which is a square saw, which is here. As you'll see, this number 5 and this green area refers to the area of the wavetable which is being controlled by this LFO. This LFO is on the ratio of 2:1 using this crossfade curve, which is a triangular ramp, I think they called it. Anyway, what these are doing here basically is this LFO is controlling the movement of this wavetable position, this intensity, this wavetable position, and this intensity as you hit a note. So over time, it's moving these along. So this is the starting sound, which is, not particularly special. Now you'll notice that if I were to, example, move this wavetable position, the quality of the sound is going to change, obviously, but it's how it changes which is what you want to know. You may notice that it sounds a little more intense now. You'll notice now that it has a kind of a, I guess that's a phasing sound. As the intensity and the wavetable positions for both of these oscillators becomes closer together. One way to make it sound more meaty is to change the pitch of the various oscillators. You'll see I've got this square saw 1 here. This does not move, it's not controlled by the LFO. It's simply there to make the patch sound a bit more meaty, heavy, whatever you want to call it. That's the sound on the side. Pretty simple, kind of square. I moved it down an octave. Make this patch sound a little. Another thing I've done is controlled B pulse number 1 with a phaser, which is set at this pitch here. What that does is applies a phasing effect to the pulse, which, how do you even describe that in words? Makes it sound more phasey, I guess. To me, it gives it a kind of a harsher, like a more gritty digital tone. You can modify the pitch of that to make it sound more obvious. If you bring it down, up like a kind of a grinding edge. You can change how much the position of the phase by moving the green circular line here, and that's by dragging over the 5. To kind of goes to a sort of a lower sound. If I were to lower the pitch of that even more, that's the sound on its own. Now, as I do this, I don't really have a particular aim in mind for what I expect it to sound like. I'm just showing you how you can take a few, like, you know, a basic bare bones kind of patch and start to mess with it until you get a noise that you didn't expect but you like the sound of. To me, the process is pretty serendipitous. I know that some designers set out to create a certain sort of sound, which that can work. But I find that you, especially with Massive for some reason, you tend to just get pretty far out crazy noises if you go in and just tweak, press buttons and see what happens. So as you'll see, this is the oscillator, which has a kind of a screamy sound to it. We can emphasize this a bit more by moving it up a pitch, reintroducing. Then we can add oscillator 1 to it. And tweak the pitch of the phaser a little bit. It's kind of a really fat mid-range noise now. Would be good as a kind of a big synth in a drop or something like that. One thing we've not explored yet is try to thicken out the lower end. There's a lot of different ways to do that. A lot of people will apply the third oscillator, which, as we have here, is a square saw 1, and change it to maybe something that's a little more obvious. Square saw 1 is a kind of a basic sound, but Massive has got a ton of really strange kind of types of oscillators that you can test out. This one gives it like a crystalline harmonic kind of you'll notice it's not in tune. This can be good for adding kind of harmonic touches to a sound. That's a pretty good one. So we can add an LFO to the wavetable position on our third oscillator as well. This is the point where the patch might start to sound more and more complicated. It's good to start with a like a basic template like we had at the beginning, just because after a while it can really get ahead of itself and you end up with, you know, oscillators all over the place, strange values. It becomes quite experimental. But for this one, let's try modulating the wavetable position, see what happens. Move it up a bit. This second one now sounds a little too obvious, so we will, well, I will move something and see what happens. Just bringing it down an octave. Another useful thing to include when creating a preset, especially if it's going to be used for more than, say, just making noises every now and then, is to add a vibrato macro. That's pretty simple. it comes down to looking at the oscillator tab, and as you can see here, there is a little drop down thing that says vibrato. What I've done here is I've set using, while you're right clicking on this little box here, macros 1, and then assigning depth and rate, doing the same thing on this one here, the depth one, this range here, which means that these are now controlled at the same time by this macro. And obviously this patch wouldn't be that good for lead work. The attack time's a bit too slow, but it gives the patch a little bit of depth, which is nice. I'm not going to use this word nice. Fuck this word nice. Anyway, another way to beef up your 8-bit, 16-bit noise is to experiment with the inserts, which are, what could I describe them as? If you're a guitarist, they're a bit like stomp boxes. They're like a one-off effect that will definitely change the sound. The one you might want to experiment with is bitcrusher. A bitcrusher is a type of distortion, as I understand it, lowers the bit rate of the sound that you're listening to. The lower the bit rate, the more lo-fi it sounds. For example, things on like a fucking Game Boy or Megadrive, as I mentioned earlier on, are at a lower bit rate than a lot of the music that you hear today, or a lot of the synths that you hear today, because back then it was more primitive, as I understand it, and they didn't have the means to create that sound. Anyway, using the bitcrusher, you can decide how much crushing of bits you want to do. You're taking it from a very extreme, kind of very harsh, to slightly less noticeable. Another thing that you can do to your sound is to play with Massive's noise generator, which is at the bottom left hand corner. It does exactly what it sounds like it does. It makes noises. So if I turn off all of these other oscillators, turn this on, you hear white noise, like the kind of noise you get when your TV is out of tune. I don't think that happens anymore. We're all on digital, but those of you who used to watch analog TV might remember that. The noise filter can be used a number of ways. In this patch, I think I would use it to bulk out the sound a bit that we have already. So we would have these oscillators back on again. You've got some white noise in the background there, making it just sound bigger. But it's not just white noise you can make pretty strange things. Murmur always sounds... Now think about what you do if you control the color of this with an oscillator. You get some very mad noises. What does that sound like to you? I can't even describe it in words. Because that takes a lot of the middle, the murmur noise, or the high range. This is the point you may want to experiment with changing what your oscillators in the middle to high range are doing, to give that murmuring noise a bit more space, or just to try contrasting the sounds together. So maybe we'll move from a B pulse to, I don't know, smooth square. You can change how the preset sweeps by adjusting the wavetable positions and the intensities and the range, which is controlled by the green line, which is tied to Mr. LFO number 5. You can create more sweeping sounds simply by increasing that range. Another way to make your sounds a little more ear-catching, definitely moving towards this kind of the area of ear raping, is to mess with the pitch on the oscillators. So at the moment these are all going by octaves, but you can detune ever so slightly. And what that does is it creates what I believe is called a binaural beat, which is a little dissonant space in between the pitches. What that means is that they don't add up anymore to an octave. Number 2, for example, oscillator 2 is now 25 cents out with oscillator 3. And oscillator 1 is now 19 cents out of tune. You hear how that noise, that kind of, that's the tone, the binaural beat. The closer they come to being tuned together, the longer the intervals of that noise. The further away, the shorter the intervals.